She's too old to be alone with him.
Those words, dripping with venom disguised as concern, sliced through the afternoon air like a blade I never saw coming. My daughter-in-law, Emily, didn't whisper them. Oh no, she projected them, her voice pitched just loud enough for every PTA mom within earshot to catch it, her hand cupped theatrically over her mouth like she was sharing some scandalous secret. But her eyes locked onto mine for just a fraction of a second. She wanted me to hear it. She needed me to feel it. And I did. Standing there in that school parking lot, keys in hand, waiting for my grandson Liam like I'd done 100 times before, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. No, I'd learned long ago to protect that. But something deeper. My dignity. My worth. The very foundation of who I'd been for nearly 70 years. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been dismissed, belittled, or erased simply because of the number of candles on your birthday cake, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Elder abuse isn't always physical. It can be mockery, exclusion, or being treated like you don't matter. If that's part of your story, you're not alone. Speak up, even if it's just sharing where you're from. Taking that first step matters. Silence only protects those who hurt us, and we're worth far more than their comfort. I didn't cry that day. I didn't scream or cause a scene. I simply walked over to Liam's classroom door, my spine straight, my face calm. I could feel Emily's eyes burning into my back, probably waiting for me to crumble, to give her the satisfaction of a public meltdown she could retell at her next wine and gossip session. But I'm a retired guidance counselor. I spent 30-plus years reading the micro-expressions on teenagers' faces, spotting the lies they thought were airtight, understanding the systems, the records, the procedures, the bureaucratic machinery that could make or break a student's future. Emily had no idea who she was dealing with. When Liam came running out, his backpack bouncing against his small shoulders, his face lit up the way it always did when he saw me. "Grandma!" he shouted, wrapping his arms around my waist with that pure, uncomplicated love only an 8-year-old can give. I hugged him back, feeling his warmth seep into the cold place Emily's words had left behind. "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly, my voice steady and warm, because he deserved that. He deserved to feel safe with me. As I buckled him into the car, I glanced back toward the school entrance. Emily stood there with her cluster of perfectly coiffed friends, all of them stealing looks in my direction, their expressions a mix of pity and judgment that made my jaw tighten. The drive home was quiet, except for Liam's chatter about his day. Something about a class hamster and a friend who brought Pokemon cards. I made the right sounds, asked the right questions, but inside, my mind was already turning, gears clicking into place. Too old to be alone with him? The phrase echoed through my skull with every red light, every turn onto our tree-lined street. Not just an insult, an accusation, an attempt to paint me as unsafe, unfit, unworthy of my own grandson's company. I'd spent decades helping kids navigate their problems, watching parents try to manipulate systems, witnessing how the truth, when properly documented, could topple even the most carefully constructed lies. Emily thought she could erase me, but she'd forgotten something crucial, something I learned back in my counseling days when I watched records resurface, when I saw how one small procedural request could pull threads that unraveled entire fabricated stories. I knew things about Emily, things she'd worked very hard to bury. A little incident from her PTA days, nothing criminal, nothing dramatic, but something that would absolutely devastate her precious, meticulously curated image if it ever came to light. That evening, after I'd made Liam his favorite grilled cheese and watched him do his homework at my kitchen table, after my son David came to pick him up with barely a word to me beyond a tired, "Thanks, Mom," I sat alone in my living room. The lamp cast long shadows across the walls. Outside, Oregon's perpetual gray drizzle tapped against the windows like fingernails. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the school's administrative contact. My finger hovered over the call button. I didn't want revenge in the loud, messy sense. I didn't want to scream or threaten or make wild accusations. That's not who I am. That's not how real power works. No, what I wanted was something far more elegant. Something that would use the very systems Emily thought she understood. The rules, the procedures, the boring, bureaucratic machinery she'd always dismissed as beneath her, to expose the truth she'd tried so desperately to hide. I wanted her to feel exactly what she'd made me feel: small, powerless, and utterly exposed. I pressed the button. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Rainwood Hills Elementary, this is Allison speaking. How can I help you? I recognized that voice. Allison Brody. We'd worked in the same district years ago. She'd always been thorough, professional, someone who understood how important proper documentation really was. My voice came out calm, almost pleasant. Hi, Allison. This is Margaret Lowell. I'm calling about a routine verification matter regarding my grandson Liam's pickup authorization. Routine. That's the word I used, because sometimes the most devastating earthquakes begin with the smallest, quietest tremor. And I was about to set my daughter-in-law's whole carefully constructed world shaking. What Emily didn't know yet, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that I'd already won. The question was just how long it would take her to realize it.
Allison's voice on the other end of that phone line was professional, warm even. She remembered me right away, which didn't surprise me. When you spend 3 decades in education, you leave impressions that don't fade easily. Margaret Lowell, she said, her tone brightening with recognition. It's been years. How are you? I kept my voice steady, almost casual. I'm well, Allison. I hope you are too. Listen, I need to request something fairly standard, a verification update for Liam's authorized pickup list. There was a brief pause. Not suspicious, just processing. Of course, she replied, with that practiced efficiency I remembered. We can absolutely handle that. Is there a specific concern? I let out a small sigh, perfectly calibrated. Not a concern, exactly. Just want to make sure everything's current and properly documented. You know how important that is. And she did know. She knew better than most. After we hung up, I sat there in the quiet of my living room, the phone still warm in my hand. The rain outside had picked up, drumming harder against the roof now, a rhythm that matched the pulse in my temples. Emily's words kept circling back, sharp-edged and relentless. Too old to be alone with him. Not just an insult, a declaration. An attempt to rewrite my entire identity, to transform me from a competent, loving grandmother to some doddering liability who couldn't be trusted with her own grandchild. I stood and walked to the window, watching raindrops race down the glass in crooked paths. My reflection stared back at me, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and lines earned from decades of smiling, worrying, caring. Lines that apparently made me obsolete in Emily's eyes. But here's what Emily didn't understand. Couldn't understand, really. Revenge doesn't have to be loud to be devastating. I'd spent my entire career watching how systems work, how a single misplaced form could derail a college application, how one documented incident, no matter how old, could resurface when the right questions were asked. Emily had a record. Nothing criminal, nothing that would make headlines, but enough. Years ago, when she first joined the PTA, she'd gotten into it with one of the teachers, lost her temper during a curriculum committee reading, said some things she shouldn't have, got formally warned by the PTA board. They documented it all: meeting minutes, witness statements, the whole bureaucratic paper trail. She'd worked so hard to bury it, reinvented herself as this poised, perfect PTA queen who never stepped out of line. But I knew it existed. I'd seen it back when I still had access to district records, back when I was helping a colleague navigate a similar parent complaint. The memory had stayed tucked away in my mind like a seed waiting for the right conditions to sprout.
And now the conditions were perfect. My verification request wasn't just about updating a pickup list. It was about triggering a review. A thorough one. The kind where they pull old files, cross-reference names, check histories to ensure nothing's been overlooked. Allison would do it properly. She always did. And somewhere in that process, Emily's carefully buried past would surface like a body rising from a lake. I didn't need to push. I didn't need to manipulate or scheme in some obvious way. I just needed to activate the machinery and let it run. The next morning, I went about my routine as always. Brewed my coffee in the old percolator that made the kitchen smell like comfort, watered my plants on the windowsill, the African violets that needed such careful attention, made my bed with hospital corners because some habits never die. Normal, calm, unshakable. That's the thing about being a woman my age. People underestimate us. They see the gray hair and the reading glasses, and they assume we're soft, passive, easy to dismiss. They forget that we've lived through decades of watching, learning, adapting. That we know how the world works because we've been navigating it since before they were born. Emily thought she could erase me with a few whispered words. She had no idea that I'd already set in motion something she couldn't stop. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A text from David, my son. Short, as always. Can you pick up Liam today? Em has a PTA thing. No please, no thank you, just an assumption that I'd be available, that I'd drop everything like I always did.
I stared at that message for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to say no, to let Emily scramble, to make her feel even a fraction of the inconvenience she'd caused me. But Liam didn't deserve that. He was innocent in all this. A sweet boy who just wanted his grandmother's love and his mother's approval without understanding they'd become opposing forces. So I typed back, of course, same time? His response came seconds later. Yes. Thanks. That afternoon, I drove back to Rainwood Hills Elementary, the same route, the same gray sky, the same tree-lined streets that looked peaceful and prosperous and utterly unremarkable. But everything felt different now. I wasn't just going to pick up my grandson, I was stepping into the early stages of something Emily wouldn't see coming until it was too late. When I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted her immediately. She was standing near the entrance with her usual group, 3 other PTA moms who dressed like they shopped from the same catalog, all of them laughing at something, probably at someone else's expense. Emily saw me too. Her laughter died just slightly, her smile tightening at the edges. She whispered something to the woman next to her, and they both glanced my way with expressions I'd learned to read decades ago. Pity mixed with condescension. I parked my car and stepped out, smoothing down my sweater. I walked toward the school entrance at a measured pace, my head held high, my expression pleasantly neutral. As I passed Emily's little cluster, I offered a polite nod. "Afternoon, ladies." Emily's smile looked like it hurt. "Oh, Margaret, picking up Liam again?" Her tone dripped with false sweetness, laced with something sharper underneath. I met her eyes directly, my voice calm and warm. "I am. He's such a joy. I'm grateful for every moment with him." For just a second, something flickered across her face. Irritation, maybe, or confusion that I wasn't cowering. I didn't wait for her response. I simply continued toward the door, feeling her stare boring into my back like she was trying to decode what I was thinking. Good luck with that, sweetheart. Inside the school, I walked past the administrative offices. Through the open door, I could see Allison at her desk, typing on her computer, a stack of folders beside her. She glanced up, caught my eye, and offered a small, professional smile. I smiled back.
And in that brief exchange, I knew the wheels were already turning. When Liam burst out of his classroom minutes later, he ran to me with that same uncomplicated enthusiasm. "Grandma, we learned about the solar system today." "Did you?" I said, taking his hand as we walked back through the hallway. "Tell me everything." He chattered nonstop about planets and moons and asteroids, his voice echoing slightly in the empty corridor. I absorbed every word, storing them like treasures. As we passed the administrative office again, I caught a glimpse of Allison pulling a file from her cabinet. An older file, judging by the faded label. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't tremble. I just kept walking, Liam's small hand warm in mine. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Just wait. Let the system do what systems do best. And Emily? She was about to learn that the past doesn't stay buried just because you want it to, especially not when someone who understands how these things work decides it's time for it to surface.
3 days passed before Allison called me back. 3 perfectly ordinary days where I tended my garden, folded laundry that smelled like lavender dryer sheets, and made Liam after-school snacks of apple slices with peanut butter, the way he liked them, cut into thin wedges, not chunks. Emily didn't speak to me during those days, not directly anyway, but I'd catch her staring sometimes when she dropped Liam off at my house. Her eyes would linger on me like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't know existed yet. Good. Let her wonder. When Allison's call finally came, I was in my kitchen, hands deep in bread dough. I'd been kneading for 20 minutes, working out the tension in my shoulders through the repetitive press and fold, press and fold. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the phone, flour still dusting my fingers. Allison's voice was professional but friendly, the way it always was. "Margaret, hi. I wanted to give you an update on that verification request." I kept my tone light, curious. "Oh, good. I appreciate you following through." She paused, and I could almost hear her choosing her words carefully. "So, we're processing everything as standard procedure, but it looks like the review might expand just a bit." My heart picked up speed, but my voice stayed calm. "Expand? In what way?" "Well," she explained with that meticulous precision I remembered, "when we pull authorization files, protocol requires us to cross-reference with any documented parent involvement history, PTA records, volunteer logs, that sort of thing." Perfect. Exactly what I'd hoped for. "That makes sense," I said, my tone thoughtful and unhurried. "You want to make sure everything's thorough and up to date." "Exactly," Allison agreed, relief evident in her voice. "It's nothing unusual, just standard administrative due diligence. But I wanted you to know it might take a few more days than typical." I thanked her warmly and hung up the phone, setting the phone down on the counter with hands that didn't shake. Then I went back to my dough, kneading with renewed purpose, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. The machinery was moving now, slowly, methodically, impossibly to stop. Emily's past wasn't just going to surface, it was going to be pulled into the light by the same administrative systems she'd always dismissed as boring bureaucratic nonsense. The irony was almost poetic. That evening, David stopped by to drop off some groceries I'd asked him to pick up. He was distracted, scrolling through his phone even as he unloaded bags onto my kitchen counter. "Thanks, sweetheart," I said, putting milk in the refrigerator. He grunted something that might have been acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving his screen. I watched him for a moment, this son of mine who'd grown into a man so focused on work that he'd stopped noticing the currents running beneath his own household. "How's Emily doing?" I asked casually, folding a reusable shopping bag. David shrugged, finally glancing up. "Fine, I guess. She's been stressed about some PTA thing. You know how she gets." I did know. Better than he realized.
She seems tense lately, I offered gently, testing the waters. Another shrug. When isn't she tense? She's always got 10 things going on. He wasn't defensive exactly, just checked out. Easier to focus on spreadsheets than the emotional weather patterns in his own home. I didn't push. Not yet. He left 15 minutes later with a distracted kiss on my cheek and a promise to bring Liam by on Saturday.
After he was gone, I stood at my sink, washing the few dishes from lunch, looking out at my backyard through the window. The garden was starting to show signs of early autumn, leaves turning amber at the edges, the air carrying that crisp, earthy smell that meant change was coming. Change was definitely coming. The next afternoon, I was at the grocery store when I ran into one of Emily's PTA friends. Karen, I think her name was. Blonde highlights, yoga pants, the kind of woman who always looked like she was on her way to or from a workout. She spotted me in the produce section and approached with that overly bright smile people wear when they're not quite sure how to interact with you. "Margaret, how are you?" she chirped, her voice a little too loud for the quiet hum of the store. I selected a perfectly ripe avocado and placed it in my basket. "I'm well, Karen. And you?" "Oh, busy, busy. You know how it is." She laughed that nervous laugh people make when they're filling silence. "Emily mentioned you've been helping a lot with Liam lately." "Interesting. So Emily was talking about me." I met Karen's eyes with a warm, grandmotherly smile. "I love spending time with him. He's such a bright, sweet boy." Karen nodded a bit too enthusiastically. "He really is. Emily's so lucky to have family support." The way she said lucky had a strange emphasis, like she was reciting a line Emily had fed her. I could have left it there, been polite and moved on, but something in me, maybe the lingering sting of Emily's parking lot humiliation, made me add one more thing. "Family is everything," I said softly, my voice gentle but firm. "It's so important to protect those relationships. You never know what you might lose if you take them for granted." Karen's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering across her face like she wasn't sure if I'd just said something profound or passive-aggressive. I gave her arm a light pat and moved past her toward the dairy aisle, leaving her standing there among the heirloom tomatoes. Small moves. That's all I needed. A comment here, a request there, tiny ripples that would eventually become waves.
That night, I couldn't sleep, not from anxiety. I was past that, but from anticipation. I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood adjusting to temperature changes. This house had been mine for 40 years. I'd raised David here, celebrated birthdays and Christmases, mourned my husband here when cancer took him too young. These walls held my history, my worth, my life. And Emily thought she could just erase all that with a few cruel words? No. Monday morning came wrapped in fog, the kind of thick gray blanket that made Rainwood Hills look like something from a ghost story. I made my coffee extra strong and sat at my kitchen table, waiting. The call came at 9:15. David's number flashed across my screen. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice calm and curious. "Good morning, sweetheart." His voice was tight, confused. "Mom, did you do something at the school?" My heart was racing, but I kept my breathing steady. "What do you mean?" "Emily just got a call," he said, frustration edging into his tone. "Something about a mandatory meeting regarding Liam's authorization records. She's freaking out. Do you know anything about this?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough. "I requested a standard verification update," I said simply, truthfully, just making sure everything was current. "Is there a problem?" The pause on his end was heavy, loaded with things he wasn't saying. Finally, David sighed. "I don't know. Emily's acting really strange about it. I bet she was. I'm sure it's just routine, I offered gently. Schools have to be thorough these days. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up, but I could hear it in his voice. Doubt. The first crack in his trust in Emily's version of reality. I set my phone down and stared out at the foggy morning, watching it slowly burn away as the sun climbed higher. Emily's carefully constructed world was starting to crumble, and I hadn't even raised my voice.
The weekend felt like the calm before a storm I'd personally summoned. Saturday morning, David brought Liam over as promised. My grandson bounded through the door with that infectious energy only 8-year-olds possess, already talking a mile a minute about the new Lego set he wanted to build. David lingered at the doorway longer than usual, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. The morning light behind him made it hard to read his expression, but I could feel his unease radiating off him like heat from pavement. "You sure everything's okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice carrying that peculiar mix of concern and suspicion sons get when they sense their mothers are up to something. I smiled at him with genuine warmth. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Why wouldn't it be?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Emily's been really on edge. This whole school thing has her stressed. I kept my face perfectly neutral, sympathetic even. I'm sure it's just standard procedure. These things always seem more complicated than they are. He nodded slowly, but doubt lingered in his eyes. Good. Let it linger. After he left, Liam and I spent the morning building that Lego spaceship he'd been excited about. His small fingers worked carefully, following the instructions with intense concentration, his tongue poking out slightly the way it did when he focused hard on something. "Grandma," he said suddenly, not looking up from the plastic pieces, "why is Mom mad all the time now?" My heart clenched. The question was so innocent, so perceptive in that way children are when adults think they're not paying attention. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have worries that make them seem upset. It's not your fault, sweetheart. He looked up at me then, those big hazel eyes so much like David's. "She's not mad at you, is she?" Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. I pulled him close for a side hug, breathing in the little boy smell of grape juice and playground sand. "Don't worry about grown-up stuff. That's our job. Your job is just to be a kid." But even as I said it, I knew he felt the tension. Kids always do. That afternoon, after David picked Liam up, I was washing lunch dishes when my phone rang. Allison's name flashed on the screen. Unusual for her to call on a weekend. I dried my hands on a dish towel and answered, keeping my voice curious but calm. "Allison, hi. Is everything all right?" She sounded apologetic, almost hesitant. "I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday, Margaret, but I wanted to give you a heads up before Monday." My pulse quickened, but I kept my breathing steady. "Of course. What's going on?" "The review expanded a bit more than we initially thought," she explained, her professional tone softening slightly. "It turns out there are some older PTA records that need to be reconciled with current authorization protocols." I sat down at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear. "Older records?" "From about 4 years ago," Allison continued carefully. "There was an incident involving a parent-teacher conflict that was formally documented. Policy requires us to review any disciplinary notes when updating guardian clearances." My breath caught, genuine surprise coloring my voice. I had no idea the review would go that deep. And I hadn't, not entirely. I'd known Emily's record existed. I'd counted on the verification process surfacing it eventually. But I hadn't anticipated how thorough the system would be once it started pulling threads. Sometimes you light a match and step back, and the fire finds its own fuel. "It's probably nothing," Allison assured me, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But there'll need to be a meeting, all authorized guardians present. Emily, you, your son. Standard protocol when historical concerns emerge." Historical concerns. Such bureaucratic language for Emily's buried shame. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen for a long time, watching dust particles dance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. This was bigger than I'd planned, more thorough, more public. A small part of me, the part that still remembered liking Emily in those early years before the condescension set in, felt a flicker of something like guilt. But then I remembered her voice in that parking lot, the mockery, the dismissal, the way she'd tried to erase my worth in front of other people. The guilt evaporated like morning dew. Monday arrived wrapped in gray drizzle that matched my nerves perfectly. I dressed carefully that morning. A navy cardigan over a cream blouse, simple pearl earrings, minimal makeup. I wanted to look competent, composed, like someone who couldn't possibly be at the center of any controversy. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I arrived 15 minutes early, walking through Rainwood Hills Elementary's familiar hallways with steady steps. The smell hit me immediately, that universal school scent of industrial cleaner, pencil shavings, and construction paper. Allison met me outside the conference room, her professional smile tinged with something that looked like concern.
Margaret, she greeted me warmly but quietly. Thank you for coming. We're just waiting for Emily and David. Through the conference room's small window, I could see stacks of folders on the table, old folders with faded labels. My handiwork, in a sense, though the system had done most of the heavy lifting. 5 minutes later, Emily arrived with David trailing behind her. She looked perfectly put together as always. Tailored pants, crisp white shirt, hair blown out smooth, but there was something brittle in her expression. Her eyes found mine across the hallway, and for a moment, naked hostility flashed there before she smoothed it away behind a tight smile. "Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with false pleasantness. "I didn't realize you'd be here." I returned her smile with equal fakeness. All authorized guardians, apparently. David looked confused, glancing between us like he was trying to solve an equation missing key variables. We filed into the conference room and took seats around the table. Allison sat at the head with another administrator I didn't recognize, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a name tag that read, Mr. Peterson, Vice Principal. Mr. Peterson opened one of the folders with careful deliberation, his movements precise and methodical. Then he looked up at Emily with an expression that was professionally neutral but carried weight underneath. "Ms. Lowell, we've encountered some documentation during our routine authorization review that requires clarification." Emily's smile stayed frozen on her face, but her knuckles went white where she gripped the edge of the table. "What kind of documentation?" she asked, her voice strained to sound casual. Mr. Peterson slid a paper across the table toward her. Even from my seat, I could see the letterhead from 4 years ago. "A formal warning issued by the PTA board regarding an incident with a faculty member," he stated matter-of-factly. "There are protocols when past disciplinary actions appear in authorization reviews. We need to ensure all parties are aware and in agreement about current arrangements." The color drained from Emily's face so fast, I thought she might faint. David leaned forward, confused. What warning? What incident? Emily's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish gasping on dry land. And I sat there, hands folded calmly in my lap, watching her perfect facade crack down the middle. The fire I'd lit had found its fuel, and it was burning hotter than even I had expected. Mr. Peterson's next words fell into the room like stones into still water. "Perhaps you'd like to explain the circumstances of that warning to your family, Ms. Lowell?" Emily's eyes darted to me, wild with panic and rage and something that looked almost like disbelief. She knew. In that moment, she finally knew exactly who had set this in motion, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it.
The silence in that conference room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Emily stared at the paper in front of her like it was a live grenade. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as they hovered above the letterhead, not quite touching it, as if contact would make it more real. Mr. Peterson waited with the infinite patience of someone who'd conducted 1,000 uncomfortable meetings. His pen clicked once against his notepad, a small sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. David looked between Emily and the document, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. What's he talking about? What warning? Emily's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she found her voice. It came out tight and defensive, nothing like her usual polished tone. It was nothing, she insisted, her words rushing together. Just a misunderstanding years ago, it was completely blown out of proportion. Allison reached for another folder, her movements gentle but firm. The documentation indicates you verbally confronted a teacher during a curriculum committee meeting. There were multiple witnesses who filed statements. I watched Emily's face cycle through expressions, denial, panic, anger, before settling on something that looked like cornered desperation. That teacher was being unreasonable, Emily said, her voice rising slightly despite her obvious effort to stay calm. She was undermining the entire committee's recommendations. Someone had to say something. Mr. Peterson nodded slowly, his expression unchanged. The concern isn't the disagreement itself. It's the manner in which it was addressed. According to the reports, you raised your voice significantly and used language that was deemed inappropriate for a school setting. David sat back in his chair, his face registering shock. I could see him recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his wife. And I sat there, my hands still folded calmly in my lap, saying nothing at all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain absolutely silent and let the truth speak for itself. Emily's eyes found mine across the table. The look she gave me was pure venom, barely masked behind a veneer of forced composure. She knew I'd started this. She just couldn't prove it. Mr. Peterson continued, his tone remaining professionally neutral. The reason this matters for authorization purposes is that we need to ensure all guardians interacting with students maintain appropriate behavioral standards. This was a formal warning, which means it stays in the record. So what does this mean? David asked, his voice tight with confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. It means we need all parties to acknowledge the documentation and confirm that current pickup arrangements are appropriate, Allison explained gently. It's not about punishment, it's about transparency and ensuring everyone's on the same page. Emily let out a laugh that sounded more like a gasp. This is ridiculous. That incident was 4 years ago. I've served on the PTA board ever since without a single problem. That's noted in your file as well, Mr. Peterson acknowledged, but protocol is protocol. The meeting lasted another 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Forms were signed, acknowledgments were made. Emily's signature on the final document was so tight and angry it nearly tore through the paper. When we finally filed out of that conference room, the hallway felt too bright, too normal for what had just happened inside. David walked ahead with Mr. Peterson, asking questions in a low, strained voice. Emily hung back, and for a moment, it was just her and me in that empty corridor. She turned to face me, and the mask she'd worn inside the meeting completely fell away. "You did this," she hissed, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You manipulated this whole thing." I met her eyes steadily, my voice calm and measured. "I asked for paperwork to be current. If that paperwork revealed things you wanted hidden, that's not my doing. That's yours." Her face flushed red, anger and humiliation warring across her features. "You're vindictive, petty, all of this because of one comment I made?" "One comment?" I repeated quietly, letting my own anger finally surface just a fraction. "You tried to paint me as incompetent, too old,
unsafe to be with my own grandson. You tried to erase my worth in front of people we both know." Emily's mouth snapped shut, caught. "Actions have consequences," I continued, my voice never rising above conversational level. "You should have learned that 4 years ago. Apparently, the lesson didn't stick." I walked past her then, my footsteps steady on the linoleum floor, leaving her standing there in the hallway with her perfect facade in pieces around her feet. The drive home felt surreal. Rain had started again, drumming against my windshield in that hypnotic rhythm that Oregon rain has perfected. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I realized they were shaking, not from fear, from the sheer weight of what had just happened. I'd done it. Actually done it. Exposed Emily's carefully buried past using nothing but procedure and paperwork. When I got home, I made myself tea with hands that gradually steadied. Earl Grey, extra hot, with just a touch of honey. I sat at my kitchen table, cradling the warm mug, watching steam curl up toward the ceiling. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "We need to talk." 3 words that carried the weight of everything that had just shifted in his world. I didn't respond right away. Let him sit with it. Let him process what he'd learned about the woman he'd married. An hour later, my doorbell rang. I knew who it would be before I even opened the door. David stood on my porch, rain dripping from his jacket, his face drawn and exhausted in a way I hadn't seen since his father died. "Come in," I said gently, stepping aside. He walked into my living room but didn't sit, just stood there in the middle of the floor, running his hands through his wet hair, struggling to find words. Finally, he looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Doubt. About Emily. About the story he'd been living in. "Did you know?" he asked quietly, his voice rough. "About that warning? Is that why you requested the verification?" I could have lied, could have maintained complete innocence, but David deserved better than that. He was my son. I knew it existed, I admitted, my voice steady and honest, from my time working in the district, but I didn't fabricate it. I didn't manipulate it. I simply requested that records be current and complete. He absorbed this, his jaw working. "You knew what would happen." "I knew the truth would surface," I corrected gently. "That's not the same as making something happen. The documentation was real. Emily's actions were real. I just stopped pretending I didn't know about them." David sank onto my couch, his head in his hands. "She's been lying to me. All this time, she's been presenting herself one way and hiding this whole other thing." I sat down beside him, close but not touching. "People are complicated. We all have things we're not proud of." "But she tried to make you look bad," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "She's been pushing you away from Liam, and now I'm wondering what else she's been lying about." The weight of that realization hung between us. I didn't push, didn't pile on, just let him sit with the truth he'd uncovered. After a long moment, he looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed much older. "What do I do now, Mom?" he asked, sounding like a lost boy instead of a 40-something man. And I had no easy answer for him. Because the truth is, when you pull back the curtain on someone's carefully constructed image, you can't unsee what's behind it. Emily's mask had fallen, and now David, and everyone else, could see exactly who she really was. The question was, what would they do with that knowledge? My phone buzzed again, another text, but this time from a number I didn't recognize. I glanced at the screen and felt my blood run cold. "We need to discuss your grandson's safety. There are additional concerns that have come to light. Please call immediately." It was signed by Mr. Peterson. Additional concerns. The fire I'd started was still burning, and I had no idea where it would stop. My hands went numb staring at that text message. Additional concerns. Liam's safety. Those words punched through my carefully maintained composure like a fist through paper. David was still sitting on my couch, oblivious to the message I just received. He was staring at his own hands, probably trying to reconcile the woman he'd married with the one exposed in that meeting. But I couldn't focus on him anymore, not with Mr. Peterson's words burning into my retinas. "David, I said quietly, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. I need to make a phone call. He looked up, confused. Now? I was already dialing before he finished the question. Mr. Peterson answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that same measured professionalism from the meeting. Mrs. Lowell, thank you for calling back so quickly. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my voice to stay calm. Your message mentioned additional concerns. About Liam. What's happened? There was a pause that lasted 3 seconds too long. Nothing's happened, he assured me carefully. But during our review, some statements from Liam's teacher came to our attention. Comments he's made in class that we feel warrant discussion. Ice water flooded my veins. What kind of comments? Perhaps it's better if we discuss this in person, Mr. Peterson suggested gently. Can you come in tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock? I agreed because what else could I do, then hung up with fingers that had gone completely cold despite the warm house around me.
David was standing now, his earlier confusion replaced by sharp concern. Mom, what's wrong? What was that about? I told him, watched his face go from worried to panicked in the span of a breath. What could Liam have said? He asked, his voice rising slightly. He's 8. He talks about Pokemon and Lego. What could possibly be concerning? But I knew. Oh God, I knew. Children say things, innocent things they don't understand the weight of. And sometimes those innocent observations land like grenades in adult situations. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed listening to the house creak and settle, my mind spinning through possibilities. What had Liam said? Had he mentioned something about Emily at home? About their fights? Or worse, had he somehow mentioned something I'd said? The thought made my stomach clench with guilt. I'd been so careful, so measured, but had I let something slip in front of him?
At 3 in the morning, I got up and made chamomile tea I didn't drink. Just held the mug, feeling its warmth against my palms, trying to ground myself in something solid. The kitchen window reflected my face back at me, an older woman with worry lines deepening around her eyes, silver hair disheveled from restless tossing. Had I gone too far? Had my quiet revenge put Liam in some kind of crossfire I hadn't anticipated? Morning came gray and reluctant, the kind of dawn that looks like it would rather stay night. I dressed carefully again, this time in a soft gray sweater and black slacks. Armor, disguised as grandmotherly comfort. David met me in the school parking lot at 8:45. His face looked haggard, like he'd slept as poorly as I had. Emily wasn't with him, which spoke volumes about the state of things between them. We walked into the school together in silence, heavy with dread.
Mr. Peterson met us outside his office, along with a woman I didn't recognize. Younger, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed masses. This is Ms. Reeves, Mr. Peterson introduced her with careful formality. Liam's teacher. Ms. Reeves smiled at us, but it was the careful smile of someone about to deliver uncomfortable news. We settled into Mr. Peterson's office. It smelled like coffee and old books and the particular mustiness of school administration everywhere. Ms. Reeves pulled out a folder, not an old one this time, but current, recent. I want to start by saying Liam is a wonderful student, she began, her voice warm but measured, engaged, creative, kind to his classmates. The but hung in the air unspoken. David leaned forward, tension radiating from every muscle. What did he say? Ms. Reeves glanced at Mr. Peterson, who nodded slightly. She opened the folder and pulled out what looked like journal entries, elementary school writing, the letters careful and round. We do daily journaling, she explained gently. The students write about their day, their feelings. It helps with literacy and emotional processing. She slid one entry across the desk toward us. I read it
and felt the floor drop out from under me. In Liam's careful 8-year-old handwriting, "Mom yelled at Grandma on the phone last night. She said Grandma is trying to ruin everything. I heard her crying after. I don't understand why Grandma would be mean. Grandma is nice to me." David's face went white. Ms. Reeves pulled out another entry, this one from a few days earlier. "Mom and Dad fight about Grandma a lot now. Mom says Grandma is too old. Dad says Mom is being unfair. I wish they would stop fighting. It makes my stomach hurt." The words blurred as tears I refused to let fall stung my eyes. My grandson, my sweet, perceptive grandson, caught in the middle of a war he didn't understand. A war I'd started. Mr. Peterson's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts, gentle but firm. "We're not here to assign blame, but we are concerned about the level of family conflict Liam is witnessing. Children shouldn't feel anxious about adult disagreements." David's voice came out strangled. "That Emily said that? That my mother is trying to ruin everything?" Ms. Reeves nodded sympathetically. "According to Liam's account, yes, and there are a few other entries that suggest ongoing tension. She didn't show us the others, but the implication was clear. Liam had been documenting our family's unraveling in his daily journal. An innocent witness, a collateral casualty."
I found my voice finally, though it came out rough. What happens now? Mr. Peterson folded his hands on his desk, his expression serious, but not unkind. "We recommend family counseling. We have resources we can provide, and will continue monitoring Liam's emotional state at school." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "We're not suggesting any changes to custody or pickup arrangements at this time, but if the conflict continues to affect Liam this significantly, we may need to revisit that conversation." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "Get your house in order, or we'll get it in order for you." David stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need to talk to Emily." He left without waiting for us, his footsteps echoing down the hallway with purpose and barely contained rage. I sat there for a moment longer, staring at Liam's journal entries spread across the desk. Ms. Reeves reached across and gently covered my hand with hers. "Mrs. Lowell, Liam talks about you with such love every day. Whatever's happening with the adults, please know that he feels safe with you. That matters." Her kindness broke something loose in my chest. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Walking to my car felt like moving through water. Everything seemed slower, heavier. I'd wanted to reclaim my dignity, to expose Emily's hypocrisy, to prove I wasn't too old or too incompetent. But I'd never wanted this, never wanted Liam caught in the crossfire with stomach aches and journal entries full of confusion and pain. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from David. "Coming over tonight. Emily and I need to talk. Then we're all talking together. This ends now." I leaned against my car door, the cold metal pressing into my back, and stared at that message. This ends now. But which this was ending? The conflict? Emily's condescension? My revenge? Or something bigger, something that involved the entire structure of our family and who got to stay in it? I drove home in a daze, operating on autopilot while my mind raced ahead to the conversation looming tonight. David was angry, at Emily certainly, but maybe at me too. For starting this, for not letting it go. Emily would be cornered and dangerous. People are never more unpredictable than when their carefully constructed worlds collapse. And Liam, innocent, observant Liam, was caught in the middle of it all. That evening, as dusk painted my living room in shades of gray, I heard cars pulling up outside. 2 cars, David's sedan, Emily's SUV. They were here, all of us, together, for a conversation that would determine whether my quiet revenge had restored my dignity or destroyed my family. I stood and smoothed down my sweater, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. Whatever happened next, I'd set these wheels in motion. Now I had to face where they'd rolled.
I opened the door to find David and Emily standing on my porch like opposing forces held in temporary ceasefire. David's jaw was set tight, his eyes carrying that particular exhaustion that comes from hours of arguing. Emily looked immaculate as always, perfect hair, flawless makeup, but there was something brittle in the way she held herself, like she might shatter if touched. Neither of them greeted me. They just walked in, the air around them crackling with unspoken tension. I closed the door and turned to face them in my own living room, suddenly feeling like a stranger in my own home. David spoke first, his voice flat and controlled, in a way that suggested he was holding back something much bigger. "We need to figure this out, all of us, tonight." Emily's eyes flicked to me, and the look she gave me was pure ice wrapped in forced civility. She didn't sit, just stood near the window with her arms crossed defensively across her chest. I moved to my armchair, the one that had been mine for 40 years, and sat with as much dignity as I could muster. The silence stretched thin between us. Finally, David let out a long breath that sounded like surrender. "Liam is hurting. That's the only thing that matters right now. My son is writing in his journal about how our fighting makes his stomach hurt."
His voice cracked on the word stomach, and I saw Emily flinch slightly. "So we're going to talk," David continued, his tone brooking no argument. "Really talk. And we're going to figure out how to fix this." Emily's perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line. When she spoke, her voice was tight and defensive. "I'm not the villain here, David. Your mother deliberately sabotaged me at the school." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I could have denied it, could have maintained my innocence, but I was tired of pretending. "I requested a verification," I said quietly, meeting Emily's glare head-on. "That's all I did. The rest, the records, the meeting, the consequences, those came from your own actions." Emily's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't play innocent now." "You're right," I admitted, and both of them looked surprised by my honesty. I knew there was a record. I knew requesting verification might surface it, and yes, part of me wanted you to face what you'd tried to hide. David's eyes widened slightly, but I kept going. "But I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't lie. I didn't manipulate facts," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own behavior." Emily's face flushed red, anger and humiliation warring across her features. "Because I made one comment? Because I said you were too old?" "Because you tried to erase me," I corrected, my voice rising slightly despite my effort to stay calm. "You whispered it loud enough for everyone to hear." I gripped the armrests. "You wanted me humiliated. You wanted me pushed out. So yes, I pushed back, but I pushed back with truth, not lies." David held up his hands, his voice strained and weary. "This isn't about who started what. This is about Liam." But Emily wasn't finished. Her voice came out choked with emotion I'd never heard from her before, something raw and wounded. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, her composure finally cracking. "Being judged constantly, every decision scrutinized, every mistake remembered forever."
Her hands were shaking now, that perfect polish finally showing its cracks. "That warning from 4 years ago?" she continued, her voice breaking. "I was trying to advocate for better curriculum. I lost my temper once, and it's followed me ever since." I watched her fall apart and felt an unexpected flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but only a flicker. "Then you should understand exactly how I felt," I said quietly, "when you tried to mark me as too old, too incompetent, too dangerous, based on nothing but your own insecurity." The parallel hit her like a physical blow. I could see it in her face, the sudden recognition that she'd done to me exactly what had been done to her. Emily sank onto my couch, her perfect posture finally collapsing. "I didn't mean it like that." "But that's how it landed," my voice softer now. "Words have weight, especially when they're designed to diminish someone." David moved to sit beside Emily, not touching her, but present. His voice was quiet and serious when he spoke. "The school said we need family counseling, that if this continues, they might get involved more formally." The threat in those words was unmistakable. Child services, custody concerns, the nuclear option nobody wanted. Emily's head snapped up, panic flooding her eyes. "They can't! They wouldn't!" "They would if they thought Liam was in an unhealthy environment," David said bluntly. "And right now, with him writing about stomach aches and adult fights, we are an unhealthy environment." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, Emily looked at me directly for the first time since entering my house. Her voice came out small and defeated. "What do you want from me?" It was a genuine question, not an attack, just exhausted surrender. I considered it carefully. What did I want? An apology would be nice. Recognition of what she'd done. Respect for my role in Liam's life. But more than that, I wanted my grandson back, whole and happy and free from anxiety. "I want us to stop hurting Liam," I said finally. "That's what I want." David nodded, relief evident in his face. "Then we figure this out, together, with a counselor if we need to." Emily wiped at her eyes, carefully so as not to smudge her makeup, and nodded slowly. We talked for another hour, not yelling, not attacking, just exhausted people trying to navigate a mess we'd all contributed to in different ways. Boundaries were discussed, schedules were negotiated, apologies were offered, stiff and uncomfortable but genuine enough. When they finally left, the house felt simultaneously emptier and lighter. I sat in my kitchen with another cup of tea I wouldn't drink, processing everything that had just happened. Had I won? Had Emily lost? Or had we all just agreed to a temporary truce? I didn't know yet. But tomorrow was Wednesday, my regular day to pick up Liam from school. And this time, when I walked through that parking lot, I wouldn't be dismissed or mocked or erased. Emily had agreed to that much, at least. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Miss Reeves. "Hello, Mrs. Lowell. Tomorrow, after pickup, could you stop by my classroom briefly? Liam has something he wants to show you. Nothing concerning, actually quite lovely." I stared at that message, a small smile tugging at my lips despite the emotional exhaustion. Something lovely from my grandson. After all this chaos and conflict and consequences, maybe there was still something pure and good waiting at the center of it all. I texted back my confirmation and set the phone down. Tomorrow, I'd find out what Liam wanted to show me. Tomorrow, I'd walk back into that school, not as someone fighting for recognition, but as someone who'd already reclaimed her place. The question was, would Emily honor what she'd agreed to tonight? Or was this just the eye of the storm, a brief calm before everything erupted again? I guess I'd find out soon enough. But for tonight, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd all learned something, even if the lesson had cost more than any of us expected to pay. Wednesday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine breaking through Oregon's perpetual gray. I stood at my bedroom window, watching light filter through the trees, golden and warm in a way that felt almost symbolic, like the universe itself was acknowledging some shift in the atmosphere. Or maybe I was just being sentimental. Either way, today was my regular pickup day, the first one since everything had exploded and tentatively reassembled. I dressed with more care than usual. A soft blue cardigan Liam always said made my eyes look pretty, comfortable slacks, my pearl earrings, not armor this time, just myself. The drive to Rainwood Hills Elementary felt different somehow. Familiar streets, same route, but I wasn't bracing for battle anymore, wasn't steeling myself against mockery or dismissal. I was just going to pick up my grandson, the way it should have been all along. When I pulled into the parking lot, my heart did a small stutter. Emily's SUV was there, parked near the entrance just like it had been that day she'd said those words that started everything. But this time, when she saw me, she didn't gather her cluster of PTA friends, didn't whisper behind her hand, didn't perform for an audience. She just gave me a small, stiff nod. Barely perceptible, more acknowledgement than greeting, but it was something. I nodded back and walked toward the school entrance with my head high, but not defiant, just present, just claiming my rightful space. Inside, the hallways smelled like tempera paint and that specific sweetness of elementary school, juice boxes and hand sanitizer and construction paper. Sounds of children's laughter echoed from classrooms, that particular joy that exists only in the before homework hours. Liam burst out of his classroom the moment the bell rang, his backpack bouncing as he ran toward me with uninhibited enthusiasm. "Grandma!" he shouted, wrapping his arms around my waist with that pure, uncomplicated love I'd been fighting to protect. I hugged him back, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo and the slight playground dust that clung to his clothes. "Hey, sweetheart, good day?" He pulled back, his face bright with excitement. "Ms. Reeves said you're supposed to come see something." He grabbed my hand and practically dragged me back toward his classroom, his small fingers warm and trusting in mine. Ms. Reeves was at her desk, organizing papers with that end-of-day efficiency teachers develop. She looked up and smiled when she saw us, genuine warmth in her expression. "Mrs. Lowell, thank you for stopping by," she said warmly, then turned to Liam with encouraging gentleness. "Go ahead, sweetheart, show your grandma." Liam pulled me toward the back wall where student artwork was displayed, crayon drawings and watercolor paintings, each one labeled with a child's name and a title in careful teacher handwriting. He pointed to one in the middle, his. It was a drawing of two people holding hands, one tall with silver hair, one small with a bright smile. Behind them was a house with a garden full of colorful flowers. The title, written in Liam's careful letters, read, "My Grandma's Garden, Where I Feel Safe." Something broke open in my chest. Not painful, the opposite of painful. Release, pure, flooding release. I knelt down to Liam's level, my voice thick with emotion I didn't try to hide. "It's beautiful, honey, absolutely beautiful." He beamed at me with pride. "Ms. Reeves said we should draw our favorite place, and I picked your garden because that's where we build Legos, and you make me snacks, and nobody yells." Nobody yells. Those two words carried so much weight. Miss Reeves moved closer, her voice soft and meant just for me. "He talks about you constantly, Mrs. Lowell, with such love. I wanted you to see that, to know that whatever else is happening, you're his safe place." I stood,
my knees protesting slightly, and looked at this young teacher who'd shown such compassion to my grandson. "Thank you for caring about him, for noticing when he was struggling." She smiled gently. "That's the job. And for what it's worth, I can see why he feels so safe with you." We left the classroom with Liam chattering about his day, something about a science experiment with vinegar and baking soda that had erupted spectacularly. I absorbed every word, storing them like treasures. As we walked through the parking lot toward my car, I saw Emily again. She was loading something into her SUV, her movements tense and controlled. She glanced over at us, at Liam holding my hand, smiling up at me, completely at ease. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Not anger this time, something softer, something that might have been regret or recognition, or maybe just exhaustion. She looked away first. The drive to my house was filled with Liam's excited recounting of playground politics and lunch table negotiations. I listened with full attention, asking questions, laughing at his observations about classmate drama that seemed earth-shattering in the way only third-grade social dynamics can. At home, we had our usual after-school routine: apple slices with peanut butter, homework at the kitchen table while I prepped dinner, Lego construction on the living room floor. Normal, peaceful, right. Around 5, David came to pick him up. He lingered at the door after Liam ran to the car, his expression serious but softer than it had been in weeks. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice carrying weight. "I talked to Emily. Really talked. We're going to that counseling, starting next week." I nodded, not sure what to say. He continued, choosing words carefully. "I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening, how she was treating you. I was so focused on avoiding conflict that I let the actual problem get worse. My son, my complicated, conflict-averse son who'd finally opened his eyes. It's not all on you," I said gently. "We all contributed, in different ways." He nodded, then surprised me by stepping forward and pulling me into a hug, a real one, the kind we hadn't shared since he was young and still turned to me with his problems. "I think you were right, Mom," he said quietly into my shoulder. "She needed to face some things. We all did." After he left, I stood in my doorway watching his taillights disappear down the street. The evening air was cool and smelled like approaching rain, that particular Oregon scent of wet earth and pine. I went back inside and made myself tea. Earl Grey, properly steeped this time, with honey stirred in slowly. Sitting at my kitchen table, I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo I'd taken of Liam's drawing before we left the classroom. 2 figures holding hands, a garden, safety. I hadn't fought for revenge, not really. I'd fought for this, for the right to be present in my grandson's life, for recognition of my worth, for the simple dignity of not being erased. Had it been messy? Yes. Had it hurt people, including myself? Absolutely. Had Liam gotten caught in crossfire I'd helped create? That guilt would stay with me. But sitting there in my quiet kitchen, tea warming my hands, I also felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not triumph, not vindication, just peace. Emily would always be complicated. Our relationship would probably never be warm, but it didn't have to be, as long as it was respectful, as long as she recognized that I had a place in this family, that avoiding conflict isn't the same as solving it. As for me, I was exactly who I'd always been, a grandmother who loved fiercely, a woman who refused to be diminished, someone who understood that sometimes you have to fight for your worth, even if that fight looks quiet from the outside. The next morning, Liam's drawing arrived in a text from David. He'd framed it. The message underneath read simply, "For your wall, because it's true." I printed it out and hung it on my refrigerator, right at eye level where I'd see it every day.
A reminder that the battle hadn't been about winning or losing, it had been about being seen, being valued, being undeniably, unmistakably present. And in that, I'd succeeded completely. No one would ever call me too old again, not because I'd silenced them with force, but because I'd proven, quietly, strategically, undeniably, exactly who I was. A grandmother, a protector, a woman who reclaimed her worth, and that was more than enough.